Hi Shane. I wanted to do a video response to the second half of your weighing in on the debate between How the World Works, Thunderfoot, and The Amazing Atheist. Let me first say that I'm a big admirer of your work. I really like your channel a lot. Your debunking of creationists is top-notch, truly. The Bogosity series is wonderful. And I even like your stuff on economics. I find it informative and thoughtful. But I also find it really kind of one-sided and biased. So I wanted to sort of, with that in mind, talk about some of the points you bring up in this most recent video. So first off, your point about Senegal. You say this.
Well, gee, I know when I think of the great free market societies, Senegal is just at the top of the list.
But you ignore the fact that it's capitalist forces in India that were an integral part of the illness coming about in the first place. Companies in India created an economic incentive to dig up the lead in the soil, which came from the batteries and led to people getting sick in the first place. Now, you imply that if the land in Senegal was privately owned, this wouldn't have happened. And you may be right. In fact, I suspect you probably are. But you say this as if it were a magic bullet that completely fixes the problem. The Senegalese don't need environmental regulation, they just need private property. That's just naive. Capitalism doesn't just spontaneously arise out of nothing. It has a history. It took thousands of years for modern capitalism to develop in Europe. Thankfully for Senegal, they can leapfrog by learning lessons from more advanced capitalist countries like ours, and I do think that we should help them in that regard and help them modernize and become capitalists where we can. But the point remains that this is still going to take a long time. So what do we, the remaining capitalist countries, do in the meantime? Left to their own devices, we will do exactly what those Indian companies did: exploit the hell out of their resources. It is circumstances like this where environmental regulation is precisely what is called for. Pollute the hell out of non-developed countries and you will face sanctions. Without that kind of regulation, Senegal will never develop a modern capitalist economy. They'll be too damn sick. Next up, your point about Love Canal. Now, this is just a classic example of both anecdotal reasoning and the confirmation bias. At best, even if everything you say here is absolutely correct, the most it proves is that businesses can act responsibly and government can fuck shit up. But no one involved in this debate, not How the World Works, not The Amazing Atheist, not Thunderfoot, not myself, would deny this claim. Nothing about this story proves that private enterprise is per se superior to government when it comes to protecting the environment. More to the point, there is something of a problem with your presentation of the Love Canal story. You say that Hooker Chemical did everything it can to prevent the government from building on the site. That may be true, but you neglect the fact that they were the ones who poisoned the earth in the first place. You say that they did it in accordance with the law, but that just goes to show how the law is far too permissive when it comes to private industries burying toxic waste on their own land. Honestly, do you really think that private industries or groups have the right to take a plot of land and despoil it, making it uninhabitable for potentially thousands of years to come? No one owns a piece of land in perpetuity. Sooner or later they die or go broke, and the land is then left up to someone else. By poisoning that land, they violate both of John Locke's provisos on what you can do with your own private property. They spoil it, and they don't leave enough in common and is good enough for future generations. So as a libertarian, I hopefully at least Locke can speak to you on that regard. Next up, your bit about ethanol. Again, you're just cherry-picking your evidence here. I certainly don't deny that corn ethanol is horribly inefficient and only exists because of perverse subsidies. But this just goes to show that government doesn't always get it right, which, everyone concedes. It also shows, by the way, that private industries like Cargill can have a corrosive influence on government, but I'll set that aside for now because it's a related but separate topic. Back to the main thread. There are government subsidies for switchgrass ethanol too. Google it and you can find some. And the private industries that are working on switchgrass ethanol never would have gotten off the ground in the first place were it not for previous government-sponsored research into ethanol in the first place. So in the very least, the truth is a lot more complicated than you make it out to be. Lastly, your point about government is force. This is just bad reasoning. Just because the government is backed up by force does not mean that the government is force. Quick analogy, and I'll leave government out of it just like you prefer. I spent the last 8 years in Texas. Now, I'm sure you know Texas has an awful lot of guns. So if I were to break into someone's house, I run a significant risk of being shot. So does that mean that what keeps me from breaking into people's houses is the threat of force? No, I don't break into people's houses because I respect their right to private property. So despite the fact that the rule of not breaking into someone's house is backed up by force, it does not follow that that rule exists only because of force. Likewise, most people pay taxes not because they fear the government will throw them in prison if they don't. They pay taxes because they recognize that we can't do this alone. Sometimes we're a collection of private individuals, but sometimes we are a whole collective. Government provides many goods and services that private industry cannot, and you yourself tacitly admit this when you say that the government is entitled to fund police and criminal justice. And we could debate exactly what they are entitled to provide, but in the very least we can agree upon that minimum condition. People in general realize this and willingly submit themselves to taxation. Yes, there are tax protesters. I'll give you another example. Henry David Thoreau famously was put in prison during the Spanish-American War for refusing to pay taxes. Asking me to pay for a gun is the same as asking me to shoot it, he said. Now, while I'll admit that civil disobedience like that does create moral problems, and you do have some legitimate points to be made there, but you have to admit that this is the exception and not the rule. If the populace in general rejected the idea of taxation, there is no way that the government could continue to get away with it. So yes, government force creates moral problems. But to say that government is force is kind of like saying that a car just is a battery because the battery is essential for the car to work. So I hope you've found this thought-provoking and worthwhile. I certainly find your material thought-provoking and worthwhile, and I hope you'll take at least a quick moment to give it a text response at least. Thank you very much for the food for thought. I appreciate it. Take it easy.